Hi guys, how are you? All right, welcome. This is Ageless Beauty with Erin. I am Erin. So today we are doing an Evil Lives Here. So if you're new, thank you for joining. For those of you that continue to come back, thank you. You know I love you. So if you're new, let's talk a little bit about what I will be doing. There is a TV show on Investigative Discovery Channel called Evil Lives Here. And it is currently, you can watch it on your normal TV provider at season like 17. However, when I started this whole series, I started on season 1, episode 1, and I'm on season 5, episode 2. So, because those aren't shown regularly, you can catch a repeat here and there. I have the Discovery Plus app that I watch these on. Great app if you're ever interested in looking at something that has true crime, some good series, check it out. So I sit and I watch this episode, and then I make my notes, which are over here. You'll see me looking at these, and I come here to sit and talk with you ladies and gentlemen and do my makeup while we do it. Now, it's a beauty channel, so we do beauty. I don't know if we do beauty, but we do makeup. I have another series which is called a Get Ready With Me. In that series, we do our makeup, but we discuss makeup. So on this series, I will not be discussing the makeup I'm using, but everything will be listed down below. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. This will be solely about the show while I do my makeup. And honestly, it's a way to keep my hands busy, keep my mind busy. And especially today, I'm not having the best of days. I do have a migraine forming, stress related. I won't say more. But makeup really helps me kind of get out of my head and stop thinking about things that are worrying me and stressing me. And of course, true crime. It's not funny. It's actually, it's what I go to whenever I need to zone out. And this story really hit me hard, and we'll discuss that at the end. So, yeah, I'm not real sure this story is going to be good for my head and stress levels, but it's not much of a trigger warning to give. So it's not anything graphic. It's not anything whatever, but it was really just kind of, it was a hard story. And it actually, I don't want to say too much because we'll talk about it at the end. It's a horrible story that terribly turned tragic. And that's where I grapple. So we'll discuss all that. However, we're going to get to this. Like I said, everything I will be using down below will be listed down below. And don't forget, or if you're new, I also have 3 products that I absolutely live and love. And I am thankful to be able to share a ambassador code with you for a discount. So check out those links. There might be something that you like, from fitness wear, tattoo, and health products like protein shakes and such. Check that out. Use my code. And on that note, let's get started. All right. So as I mentioned, we are actually on season 5, episode 2, originally aired, I want to say January-ish 2019. I didn't get the exact date, which is really weird because I tried to do that and I didn't. And the episode's called Let Her Rot. And the episode starts with this guy sitting down, getting mic'd up. And he is going to be our narrator. And he proceeds and starts by telling us that even in his wildest dreams, he didn't think he'd be having a conversation like this. It's the first time since it happened that he has talked about it. And he couldn't talk about it at all. It was just like so traumatic for him that he couldn't even discuss it. But it took many years for him to be able to talk about it. And Evil Lives Here then tells us, and when I mean that, when I say that, what I mean is they pop up these little bubbles, I guess, conversation bubbles that you see, and they give us pertinent information that maybe the narrator doesn't give us, but they think is important to the story. So whenever I say throughout this that Evil Lives Here tells us, that's what I mean. So Evil Lives Here tells us that this was the first time that Joshua Hudnall, has spoken publicly about his mother, Stephanie. Now, I want to remember while we talk about this, this was going on in 2019. So there's many times where he's going to say, like, it's been 7 years, it's blah, blah, blah. That was 2012. So the events of this episode happened in 2011 and 2012. So it took him 7 years to be able to discuss what was going on. And now we see who we know is Stephanie, the mother, her mugshot. And Josh tells us that he quit calling his mother Mom many, many years ago. He calls her Stephanie. So for this show, I'm going to call her Stephanie when he is talking about her. Or, you know, it's funny because I have here... this is what I will be doing as well as I'm telling his story. And if he calls her Stephanie or even bitch, that's what I will relate to you. And it's funny because later on, that's exactly what he does. And I'm like, well, I guess I saw that one coming. But yeah, so he doesn't refer to her as Stephanie. He refers to her, he doesn't refer to her as Mom. He refers to her as Stephanie. So now... another thing Evil Lives Here does that is great, I absolutely love this, is it shows actual footage of, could be news report, police investigations, interrogations, newspaper articles, pictures, actual pictures from the time. And they do that and they keep the whole thing very real in your mind that these are actual people. So now we're seeing actual video footage of what looks to be the police interrogation room and Stephanie being led in there, and she's just looks so confused, so distraught. And as we're watching this, Josh comes back and says it's been 7 years, or tomorrow back it up a minute. As we're watching the video of Stephanie walking around confused in what looks to be an interrogation room, Josh comes back and says, and I quote, "Tomorrow will be 7 years to the day I saw her last, and I'm perfectly okay with it." End quote. And just a reminder, it was 2012 the last time he saw her. And he holds no bar here. He does not care if he ever sees her again. And throughout this episode, you will get the point that Josh does not like Stephanie. And then you'll get the point why. So, we're back to the video, and Stephanie is just, it looks like she's crying, and she is just saying, and I quote, "This cannot be real," end quote. Just over and over and over. And as she kind of just wanders around this small room, she's either truly distraught or putting on one hell of a show. And I'll let you decide that as we go. And then Josh comes back and says, and I quote, "Let her rot," end quote. Then he says, if she dies in prison, all the better. All right. Like I said, no hold barred here. He doesn't hold anything back. He's over this, over it. So now he's telling us that he really never knew what normal was when he grew up. And he said people will be like, oh, this, that, normal things. And he's like, I don't know what normal is. He says what he lived with, he knew wasn't normal. And then he tells us that he didn't see his dad very often. And Stephanie and the dad, William, were married. But William worked as he worked on naval ships. So I find out, because it confused me at first, but he traveled quite a bit to these naval ships that he was working on. So he wasn't home often. And Josh says that his father loved what he did, spent many years doing it. And then, so that left him in the house with Stephanie and his two sisters. And they give us their names. And if you know me, you know I absolutely hate when Evil Lives Here gives us names of siblings and children. So I'm hoping that it's never a good sign when you get the names of the siblings. It's just not. Or children in general. Because typically, I think they don't give that information because they try to protect the innocent. So if they're given it, it typically means something bad has happened. So they give us he gives us his sister's name, Guinevere and Ruby Grace. He calls them Gwen and Gracie. So he tells us that Stephanie's priority was always Stephanie. She had kids, so what? Stephanie was first. Stephanie, whatever she wanted was, top priority. And he says that she really wanted to put out this public persona. So he says that on the outside, to the public, she was the perfect wife, the perfect mother, everything, nothing out of place. Everything was great. But that private, inside their house, she was a master manipulator. And then he says that she hid behind a holier than thou Christian image. However, she only looked the part. She didn't act that part. So she wanted everybody to believe she was this Christian, good mother, whatever. But that was not what she actually did. So she didn't necessarily practice what she preached. And then Josh tells us that his relationship with Stephanie was, as he put it in his own words, so I'm going to quote, at arm's length. He said that Mom was definitely closer to the girls than him, and he never really understood why. And I don't really know if he ever figured out why. But yeah, his mom was just not very concerned. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for when it came to Josh. And he tells us that when he got old enough to start running errands for her, she would send him down to the Jiffy store. And I chuckled. I thought that was just kind of cute because I never heard anything called the Jiffy store. And, but it was the little convenience store down the hill around the corner from their home. And he says one time he took his sister's scooter. And he was not experienced riding this scooter. Like I said, it was his sister's, but he thought, I don't really know what he thought, but he thought he would take the scooter, get there faster, and come back, get his mom's gallon of milk. So he says, things started out good. Then he got to the hill, and he started going down the hill too fast, couldn't stop, went to make the turn, too sharp, whatever, wrecked, crashed, really hurt his leg. He said that he had like a chunk torn off of it, and he was bleeding profusely, he said. And he got up, he walked himself back to the house, and when he got in, of course, the mom's first thing she says, which I understand this because it's you wouldn't have noticed anything yet, but she asked him if he got his milk, and then asked why he was bleeding. So he told her, and what happened, lots of blood pooling everywhere. So he told her what happened, and she was like, oh, okay. So he's like, she was just disinterested and kind of just meh when it came to him. So she didn't help him clean it up. He had to go in and clean up his own leg and clean up the blood that was everywhere and whatever. So, I guess that story was just for us to know that Mom just wasn't very concerned when it came to him. And of course, I don't know the sisters' stories. I don't know if they felt the same way. This is Josh's point of view. And in Josh's point of view, his mom had a very tight bond with his sisters, but could care less about him. So he says he never had a close relationship with Stephanie. Now, he tells us this, and I only chuckle because I do relate to this. And we won't get into the whys of that, but he said about the time he was 9, they started moving all the time. Said it was just a constant. It's like all he remembers from that age forward was constantly packing up the house and the rooms and getting them to a new place. They never stayed in one place very long. And he never understood why. Even when he asked, Stephanie would just tell him it's, because that's what she did. It's what she said or whatever, So he never really understood at that time why they were constantly moving. And he tells us that Stephanie was that reason. She was the reason they always had to move. And apparently she would blow through the money so quickly and not pay the rent, the utilities, or anything, really. So apparently, by the time things are starting to get cut off or the landlord's knocking on the door for the rent, they're packing up and moving. So he said it was like an every 4 to 6 month thing they did. They moved. Excuse me. And he says that this constant uncontrollable spending was an issue with his father, William, and they argued about it. Like that was the one thing Stephanie and William argued about the most, money. And that does come into play a lot in this story. But to prevent the arguments, because remember, Dad's not home often. So when he's home, he doesn't want to spend his whole time arguing with her. He just goes along with it. He's just like, okay, it's whatever. And they move. And Josh says it was just really weird because he said they would move to New Orleans, then to Pennsylvania, then back to Virginia Beach. So, it was all up and down the East Coast and not even in the same city, which was just really weird to me. But, yeah, that was, from the time he was 9 is when he really noticed them constantly moving and all these problems. So he says that his parents started arguing more. The more they moved, the more they argued. Yeah, I get that. And they never argued in front of the kids. They would always wait until the kids went to bed, and then they would start their fighting behind closed doors. I guess they went to their bedroom to argue. But Josh is like, it wasn't fooling any of us. We all heard, everything. Him and the sisters would hear every fight, and it was always about Stephanie's spending money. So Dad made the plan, and I wondered about this, but Dad decided he was going to start paying the bills and only send Stephanie enough money that she would need to survive and to buy groceries. He would send her cash for that reason. As you can imagine, that does not go over very well with Miss Stephanie. And because of that, Josh says Stephanie started being mean to the kids, or at least to him. And he asked his dad about it, why she was always so mean to him. And his dad told him that he just wasn't giving her money anymore. He was paying the bills. She was getting enough for groceries and to survive. And it just did not make her happy. Yeah. Okay. So, Stephanie's a vindictive little bitch. I'll say that before he even has to say it. But, so one day, Josh says they were in school. And I can imagine how difficult this would be if they're constantly being moved. You're going from different schools and whatever. And then one day your mom shows up and just pulls you out. And he was in math class, and she pulls him out of school, and he asks her where they're going. She doesn't tell him anything. Just tells him to get in the car, and they're going. So he says they drive an hour and a half. And he actually said, he also says that Gwen and Gracie were already in the car. So mom had picked the girls up and then was picking him up. And she drove an hour and a half to this place called Green Cove Springs. I didn't know what it was. Like, again, I'm not even sure where they're at this time. I'm not 100% sure he knows where he's at this time. That's, obviously not true. He does, but as much as they move, I get it. Anyways, he said he had no idea they were there or what the place was or why they were there until they get inside. Now, when they get inside, he said there's like 3 or 4 different employees. And each employee took Mom, Gracie, Gwen, and himself and took them into different rooms and started interviewing them. Stephanie had taken him to a woman's shelter for abused women. Yeah. And they're asking him all these questions. Does your dad hit your mom? Yada, yada, yada. And Josh is like, no, Dad does not hit Mom. And I don't know how Josh is here. He doesn't say. But then he's like, if we're here because she said that Dad hits her, we don't need to be here. That's not what's going on. He said, but, they're questioning, well, they fight a lot. There's a lot of arguments going on. And he's like, well, yeah, but, there's no abuse. But, of course, they didn't necessarily believe him. And he doesn't really say much more than that. He does say, he didn't have any way to get a hold of his father. His father was working a job in Mississippi. So he didn't even know what was going on. And Josh said that they stayed at that home for 3.5 weeks before they left. And he says, and when they went home, Stephanie acted like everything was hunky-dory. Everything was fine. But Stephanie used that as a manipulation tactic to get more money out of William. And Josh says, and I quote, it worked, I guess, end quote. But then Evil Lives Here pops up and tells us, but not for long. It's the first time it's done that, so I had to chuckle because normally when they respond, they don't respond directly to what the narrator is saying. So Josh says, yeah, it worked, and Evil Lives Here is like, nope, not for long. Anyways, it then says Stephanie would decide to take her revenge. So now the producer slides, because the producer or video camera person's always there, but not necessarily on camera. And he slides a picture of Stephanie to him. And he tells them he wasn't even going to touch the picture. He doesn't even pick it up. And throughout the whole episode, any picture of Stephanie he does not touch. He just lays sitting on the table. He does with other pictures, but not Stephanie. And he says, and I quote, I don't want nothing to do with that bitch, end quote. Like I said before, I told you I was going to call her Stephanie or that bitch, depending on what he said. And I said that jokingly. And yet here he is later saying exactly what I saw or said. Anyways, the picture's still sitting on the table. And he says it's the first time he's seen her face since he went and saw her in jail in 2012. Now, Josh is saying that Stephanie never changed her spending habits. Like that was, through this whole story, that was the whole bane of their life. And a lot of people can say that that's just kind of crazy. It's not that important, whatever. But yeah, no, that's not the case. And Josh says that he would take the girls out, or Stephanie would take the girls out shopping and just in a day spend $600-$700 on stuff they didn't need. you know, and that would be like their money to pay their rent and house, and she's out there just buying a bunch of frivolous stuff. And one time it happened, Dad was home, and was furious. And then he says here, I kind of skipped over this, but I want to make sure I point this out. He says he never understood Stephanie and Gwen's relationship. After Stephanie herself, Gwen was the next favorite. He said Stephanie was grooming Gwen. And this is foreshadowing. This is very important. But he doesn't really specify more on what he considers grooming. We do find out. So his dad and mom constantly fought about money, and these shopping trips got, she's going out and spending $600-700 that is supposed to pay bills and rent and whatever. And of course, William had enough. He took her money one time and gave her just enough to survive on. And then when she went to the shelter, he relented and gave her access back and gave her more money, and she was doing it again. So this time, he came in and he took all her bank cards, credit cards, anything that she was using, he took from her. And, he was once again going to go back to paying all the bills. And I probably don't need to tell you this, but Stephanie was not happy. And if you remember, the last time he did that, she went to a woman's shelter and accused him of abuse. So this time, and I even have it here, so this will probably be an even worse revenge on her part. And whoo, boy, if I had known what I know now. But, yeah. So Josh says that, of course, when he took her cards and everything, he gave her just enough money for groceries and anything the kids need, like for school or anything like that. But he was taking care of the bills. He was going to take care of the house. He was tired of the moving. He was tired of everything that they had been doing for so long. His mother was not happy. And Josh didn't think William understood the length that Stephanie would go because of this. Normal people don't, right? It's what it is. So he tells us the story of one night after dinner, his dad got violently ill and spent 3 hours vomiting in the bathroom. And then the next 2 days in and out of the bathroom. He said it got so bad that they really thought they were going to have to take him to the emergency room, but Stephanie never did. But at the time, Josh says, I didn't really think much of it because I had just gotten over a 24-hour stomach bug myself, like a week or two before. So he thought, well, maybe Dad got the same thing. But like I said, nobody else got it in the family. And William was like beyond 24-hour virus sick, right? But, for the kid, and it doesn't say how old he was, but he was a teenager at this point. He just thought, didn't really think anything of it because he'd been sick. But he says that, when you're sick for 3 hours straight and then you can't go to work for 2 days because you're in and out of the bathroom still sick, hugging the toilet, as he says, he should have gone to the doctor. Should have gone to the hospital, the ER, whatever. He said his dad was so sick, he ended up losing like 15 to 20 pounds in those 2 days. So yeah, there's a little bit more that should have been taken or should have been seen to and wasn't. However, he says now that he thinks it was the first time Stephanie tried to poison William. But they had nothing, other than how sick he was and nobody else in the family became sick. There really was no proof or evidence or anything that could say that she actually did. But the suspicion is now. And I'm not sure who they are. I think I do know at the end. But he says they think it was the first time Stephanie tried to poison William. So then another story where William actually took a week off work and was home. And Joshua gets up and gets out and sees his dad, you know, in his bedroom. So his dad's in his own bedroom. And Josh walks in and says, hey, what's going on? He said there was this like black stain in the middle of the carpet. And William's like, hey, go get my razor. I got to cut this out. So Josh went out to the shed, got his X-Acto knife, and come back up, and they worked together on removing this burnt hole in the ground or on the carpet. And Josh is like, what happened? What's going on? How did this happen? And William's like, oh, your mother was lighting one of her smell good candles and dropped it on the floor, and it burnt the carpet. So Josh says, you know, I don't think Dad ever really thought or knew what was going on. But then he tells us that, now we're going to play a little bit of phone tag here, so keep up. Stephanie had a friend that told Josh, or somebody, I don't know if he told Josh. I doubt he told Josh himself. But Stephanie had a friend and told somebody that Stephanie said, so this is secondhand knowledge being told to somebody, which I'm going to just say, I think they told the police, and the police told Josh. So, anyways, so Stephanie told her friend that after William went to bed, Stephanie tried to light the sheets on fire with the candle while he was sleeping. But Stephanie then said that he snored real loud, scared her, she jumped and dropped the candle on the floor. So instead of burning the sheets in the bed, she burnt the carpet. And Josh says, you know, if Stephanie had managed to set the bed on fire and kill his father, she probably would have set the whole house on fire and killed everybody. So what was her plans? I really don't know. But then they tell us, they being evil news here, that things were just going to get worse as Stephanie got angrier. And I'm like, okay, she's already tried to poison William and set her house on fire. Oh boy, hello. How much worse could it get? Well, let's find out. I'm going to put these on here in a minute. Okay. So now Josh is looking at a picture of his father, and he's actually holding it. Like I said, he holds everything, all the pictures except for the one of his mother. His Stephanie. And he's talking about his dad. So he's saying that you can look at these pictures of his father and see that he's actually a very happy man, happy person. And Josh is saying, no, he never did anything wrong. His only fault was that he tried to do too much for others, and he never took advantage of anybody. And his goal was to treat everybody fairly. And Josh said that was the greatest lesson his father imparted to him. Always be fair. Treat people fairly. I like that. And I at this moment, I get the feeling the way Josh is talking about his dad, that his dad is no longer with us. So at this point where I still don't know anything, that's what I'm getting the feeling. But you also get the fact that Josh respected his father a lot. And Josh calls him a stand-up guy. So, yeah. Josh was very close to his dad, which, looking back at this, could be why Stephanie wasn't close to Josh. And not saying that's right. I'm just saying that thinking about it, that could very well be why Stephanie treated Josh different. And she was closer to the girls. He never states it. It's actually never stated at all. That's just my take on this. So take that as you will. So, after that, Evil Lives Here pops back up and says, Stephanie tried to recruit Josh against his father. And I already know this isn't going to work. I mean, you could tell by the way he's talking about the man how much he respected and loved him. But it didn't stop Stephanie from trying. And then Josh tells us that by the time he turned 18, his independence was really like coming through. He was really trying to separate himself from his mother and everything. But he still lived at home. I guess he might have still been at school at this time or just recently out of school. Not 100% sure. But as his independence come out, Stephanie responded by trying to be more controlling over him. And there's controlling and then there's batshit crazy. So take that as you will. Anyways, Josh is telling, gotta love the loud cars in my neighborhood, a story of sorry, I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing here. So he's telling us a story one day while he's eating breakfast. Stephanie comes in and kind of tosses this pink paper at him. And he's like, what's this? Well, it was a restraining order that she wanted, and I don't understand this, but she wanted Josh to sign this restraining order against William. And he doesn't really go into the details of why Josh had to sign it. You know, I would think the girls would have signed it or she could sign it. I mean, I don't understand. But, of course, no surprise to any of us, he didn't do it. And he told her no. And she got mad and she was screaming at him just in his face. And he's like, you know, I got up. I was trying to leave, de-escalate the problem. And when he got up to leave, she started swinging on him. He said she was full, flat out punching him. Not funny. I don't mean it to be that funny when I chuckled there, but damn. And he finally got away and left the kitchen, right? And his mom was furious. But he told her, he says, I am not signing that. So later that day, he's outside doing something, comes in for a glass of water in the kitchen, and his Stephanie is, I think I just called her his mom, but Stephanie is in the kitchen cutting up something, cooking, getting dinner ready. I don't know. But as soon as Josh said, as soon as he come in through that door from outside, she was on him. And she grabbed a knife and literally started going after him, taking swings, yelling things like, you don't defy me, you do what I say, you sign that paper, blah, blah, blah. Woman had gone and lost her fucking mind. So she's chasing him with this knife, and he says he runs. He's in the kitchen. He runs to the farther side of the house to his bedroom, shuts the door. She's chasing. She's giving chase. So he throws his dresser in front of the door to keep it from being open, because she's pushing on it. She's hitting it. She's trying to get in. She's trying to break the door down. And he says, so he put the dresser in there, packed a quick bag, jumped the hell out of the window, and ran. And his dad, of course, I don't know where his dad was, but his dad wasn't home. He was working. He said he knew he had somewhere to stay. So he had a friend's house he could go to. And he went and stayed there for like 3 days before his dad got home. You know, he says that was the first time she had ever done anything like that, but it scared him. So he went and stayed with his friend for 3 days before his dad come back home and picked him up. And he said once his dad picked him up, he told him everything that happened. And his dad offered to take him to the police station to file a police report about it. And Josh said he wasn't going to do that. He figured it'd be his word against his mom's. And he knew the sisters would do and say whatever their mom wanted them to, because that was pretty much how it always went, especially Gwen. So who was very, very tight with Stephanie, remember? So he said they just went back home. But he decided shortly after the only way he was going to stay safe. So apparently even going back home, things didn't get better. But so he knew the only way he was going to stay safe was he had to get the hell out of that house for good. And the only way that he knew how to do that, I guess like right out of high school, no job, no money, whatever, was to join the service. And he said he joined the service and he never looked back. Or I won't say never, but he didn't look back. And he said it worked pretty well for a little while. Isn't that how it always goes? So this is actually heartbreaking, what he says about being in the Army. And I just want to make sure we all understand what he says here and how devastating this portion actually is. So, Josh tells us he loved being in the Army. He was in Iraq. And he says he knows that there will be some people who have something to say about what he is getting ready to say. But he says, and I quote, "Iraq was the easiest and the best time of my life. Swear to God." End quote. He then tells us that his base was the hardest hit in the Middle East. It was always being attacked. And of all the bases in the Middle East, his was, the one that was always under attack. He said there was always bombs going off and somebody trying to kill you. But even with all that craziness and confusion, it was still better than the craziness that he grew up with. Just think about that. He says, and I quote, that if someone shot at me, I could shoot back, end quote. Basically, growing up when he was being attacked with a knife or verbal attacks or whatever from his mom, and watching the fighting going on between mom and dad and just everything that he probably hasn't even told us, he couldn't fight back. He was helpless. Here, he felt like he could do something about it. And he says, no matter how bad it got in Iraq, he always knew somebody was watching his back. How awful. How awful that feels like a relief to you because of what you had to deal with and grow up. That you didn't feel like anybody had your back. And I know in many ways he thought his dad had his back, but his dad wasn't home. He was in that house with his mother and two sisters and felt completely alone. And my heart breaks for him. And the more the story goes, the more my heart just completely starts to break. We'll get there. So, okay. He says his first year in service, Stephanie never reached out to talk to him except for on paydays. Imagine that, right? I don't know. Were you shocked by that? I wasn't shocked by that. But every payday, like clockwork, she was calling him, asking for money. And he said he knew Dad was taking care of the bills, that they weren't going to be without a house and electric and food. So he wasn't going to let her guilt him into sending him money, because she kept saying she was broke. She needed, things were going to get turned off, blah, blah, blah. But he always told her no. Said he wasn't sending her anything, and she would do the whole guilt trip, whatever, and he'd end up hanging up on her. And that was that. And then next payday, she's calling again. So he says, you know, he got tired of it and told her to quit calling him. Just stop. And he says, after all the crap he put up with for 18 years, he wasn't going to let her swindle him like that. And I'm like, good for you. You know, you have to take a stand. And this was his stand. He left the house. He joined the military. He was done with her. So, yeah, he thought that was that. Until the next call he got from home. And that was a devastating call. So, he says on base, they were able to set up Wi-Fi. And when they did that, they were able to check like their personal emails, messages, even Facebook, whatever, you know. And he says one day he is on and he gets he's checking his message, and he has a message from his cousin. Tells him that he needs to call home immediately. There was a death in the family. And he says, you know, I had 2 uncles and a grandfather that had been really sick. So I just thought it was going to be one of them. And since it was a cousin that was telling him to call home, I get why he would think that, right? So he calls and he's like, hey, what's going on? What happened? Blah, blah, blah. And he finds out it was his father that was dead. Apparent robbery gone wrong is what they're telling him. The police obviously thought it was murder because of the apparent robbery gone wrong. Josh says it took everything he had to get up from the table he was sitting on or at and walk out of the room, the communication room. He said he got outside and completely lost it. He was devastated. He said, I completely broke down and just couldn't control myself from crying. He said it was horrible. Again, something else I can relate to. Getting told that your family member's dead. Of course, thankfully, I didn't have to deal with it being murder, but you still lose your shit if it's somebody you're close to. So he said a woman that he works with, a sergeant or something, found him, and you know, he's completely broke down, just crying, and she finally gets a story out of him that he's just found out his father's dead, and she helps him get out, gets him home, right? So he is on his way home, and he says that whenever you're leaving the base, they always route you through Kuwait, and he was at Kuwait waiting for his next flight. He had some time, so he went to the communication room and checked his Facebook. And he says the first thing he saw when he got online, his stomach completely just fell out. He said it was an article that said Stephanie had killed his dad, killed William, and had been arrested. And I'm seeing part of this in the reenactment. They're showing the actor, him, sitting at a computer reading this article. And the article, I could see part of it. It says something about a 19-year-old and death. And then at this point, I'm wondering, was one of the sisters involved? But he doesn't say anything about that for a minute or 2 or 10. But anyways, at this point, I get the feeling that the daughter is involved without knowing the facts. So he says he had to read that story 3 to 4 times before he fully grasped what he was reading. He said that it was totally out of left field. Nobody saw it coming. And I'm like, you told us that she poisoned your dad and tried to set him on fire. And it's maybe at the time, looking back now, he's telling us this. But at the time, it was totally out of left field. Nobody saw this coming. Okay. But Evil Lives Here tells us the biggest shock of all was still to come. That Stephanie didn't act alone. Like I said, I wasn't really shocked here because I read, or I could see part of that article. But I can't even imagine what Joshua felt in that moment. And he lost his dad. And now he finds out that one of his sisters helped kill him. Whew. Woo-hoo. So Josh says that the picture with the article was Gwen and Stephanie's mugshots. The two women had killed William. And Josh flat out says he fully believes Stephanie made Gwen do it. So now we are looking at a picture of Josh and his father. Josh is a little older, probably closer to 18. And if not older than that, once he hits the military, I'm not sure. It doesn't say. But he says that this is one of the few pictures he has with his dad. He states, again, and he says this many times throughout, that his father was one of the only friends he had. And then as he's looking at these pictures, he's like, I'll never get to see him again. And even 7 years later, from that moment, the loss is still very, very strong. I get that. Now we're seeing the mugshots again of Stephanie and Guinevere. And he still won't pick them up. Won't even pick up Gwen's pictures at this point. They're just sitting on the table in front of him. And he said what they did was such a sucker punch to him. Like, yeah. So it's bad enough knowing that he lost his dad, but finding out that two people that were supposed to be the closest to him were responsible, closest to William, were responsible for his death is mind-boggling. So when he finally gets home, he learns what happens. And at this point, we're seeing actual crime scene footage. And I'm going, whoa, I can't believe they're showing us this. But they are. Crime scene footage. And, Josh tells us that when they were planning the funeral, they weren't even sure if they could have an open casket because of all the damage that was done to him. And he never says if they did or not, but he talks about, you know, they truly discuss whether or not they should be able to do it. And I'm going to say no, they didn't. So in the footage that we're seeing, we're actually seeing the pickaxe laying beside the bed that William was laying in. So Josh tells us that Gwen grabbed the pickaxe, went to the bedroom, and hit their father 5 times with it. And then we're seeing footage of blood splatter, like actual footage of this crime scene. Blood splatter all over the walls. I mean, to literally say I cannot believe they are showing us this is an understatement. But so now we see footage of a detective with Gwen discussing where and how many times she hit her father. And she's talking about, I mean, okay, I have to read this just to make sure I get it right. because this whole part here is just mind-boggling. Okay. So Gwen, in the video, says, or when she's asked why she kept hitting her father after the initial hits to the head, I believe, she said he was making noises after she hit him and she wanted him to stop. She said it was like he was snoring, and she quotes, I quote, she says, "I was freaking out and I didn't know what I was doing. I was so scared," end quote. Now, Josh tells us that the police could never prove that Stephanie was actually in the room with Gwen when she killed her father. But he's positive. He's like, I know she was. Gwen would have never done it unless Stephanie had been in there. Josh says apparently Stephanie had been planning this for years. And her original plan was to get Josh to do it. And yet when Josh started rebelling and not listening to anything she said, she knew she needed to change that plan up. I mean, there was no way he was going to do anything to his father. No way. And she apparently realized that and changed up her plans and started grooming Gwen to do it. So, he tells us that they did the deed on a Wednesday night and then came back the next morning and acted like they found him dead in the bed. And then we're hearing the actual 911 call Stephanie made after finding William dead. And I've got something out of order. Okay, so I don't know where my note is on this, so I'm going to try to remember instead of having to go back. But the police suspected there was something wrong with this whole thing, because Josh said that we're looking at more crime scene pictures. And Josh says, Stephanie and Gwen did a really good job making the house look like it had been looted. It had been trashed. There was, stuff laying everywhere. And he said his father's living room. And I do come back to that because I was like, did they have separate living rooms? What kind of house were they living in? But I find out. Anyways, so he says they made a really good job of making it look like someone trashed the house. He said, yet the police were very suspicious because there was no proof of break-in. So like they showed pictures and one of the doors still was locked from the inside. So they let themselves in and out of his house and didn't make it look like there was a break-in, and the police were immediately suspicious, and the girls were arrested. So he doesn't really talk too much about that. I will talk more going in a little bit. Like I said, I don't even have my notes, so when I printed this, I somehow skipped a whole page. I don't know how. That or I deleted it. Who knows? But they're arrested. And he says he goes and visits Stephanie. Said he wanted to find out what happened, why it happened, And he says she wouldn't tell him anything. No surprise. But then starts saying things and saying that it was actually his fault. It was Joshua's fault because Josh wouldn't send her any money. What did she expect to do? And that comes into play, and it's part of the notes that it is part of I've got right here. Okay. Gosh, I'm losing it having a page missing, so I'm trying to remember. But yeah, she's blaming Josh, telling him, what did he expect her to do? You wouldn't send me any money. Stephanie's a piece of shit. Okay. Yeah, just wow. Anyways, he said the longer he sat there, the madder he got. Imagine that. And he said he had to leave. He said he hung up the phone because they were in the separated glass partitions talking on the phone. And he hung up on her and left before the rage took over, and he ended up getting arrested himself. He said it wasn't going to do him any good to get arrested trying to go through that partition to her. So he left. And that was the last time he saw her. He hasn't spoken to her or hasn't seen her since. Okay, let me... So I think when he visited Stephanie, pretty much what he expected. You know, he didn't expect her to really tell him anything. Of course, I don't think he expected her to blame him. But I mean by that, he wasn't surprised. However, he says when he visited Gwen, it was a lot more heartbreaking. And he said as soon as Gwen saw him, she started crying, and all she could say was she was sorry, she was sorry, she was sorry. He said he tried to talk to her, tried to ask her why, what happened, why did you do it? And she couldn't stop crying loud enough or long enough to even discuss and explain or talk to him. So he says that was pretty much it, and that was the last time he saw her. And he said he's gotten a few letters over the years here and there, but still no real explanation. And then Evil Lives Here pops up and tells us that what Josh didn't know was that Guinevere had revealed during her interrogation, why she did it. And he's actually going to watch this video the same time we are. So for the first time, he is seeing Gwen's video and her explanation on why she did what she did. He says, it's been 7 years. It's time for some answers. Then he hits the play. So in the interview, Gwen is saying they had no money. They had nothing. Lights were being cut off, and they had no house. They couldn't make their house payment. They were going to have to move, and they had no food. And then she was like, all dramatic. Do you know how much money he had? Do you know how much he had? He had $6,000. And he would give, she says, he had $6,000. $6,000, and he only gave us $400. She had no choice because he had all the money. Now, I'm going to just put a little bit of a spoiler here because I will get to it at the end. But what Josh doesn't tell us here that I find out is that William and Stephanie were actually estranged at this point. He was living in his own house, which explains his living room. And the girls and Stephanie were living in their own place. So I'm assuming he gave them $400 a month, but he was no longer paying his bills because they were no longer together. Anyways, we'll get more back to that more. So now Josh says, well, that was a twist he wasn't expecting. He said, Dad did not have $6,000. And Josh says he gave Stephanie everything he had except for enough to pay his rent and keep his lights on. And food. So for years, Josh said that, even before seeing this video, he always said that he felt Gwen was brainwashed. He said after seeing that, he 100% believes she was brainwashed. He says that is definitely Stephanie talking, not Gwen. Now he says, and I chuckled. It was such a good saying. And I'm going to quote. Josh says, and I quote, Gwen always had more loyalty than she did smarts. End quote. So now he says that if he could have convinced Gwen to move out and get away from Stephanie, Dad would be alive. Gwen would be, better off, not in jail, and everything would be okay. Josh says he doesn't think Gwen should have got as much jail time as she did. And then he says that he thinks Stephanie should have got more. And then he says about Stephanie, and I quote, unless we get lucky and she happens to die in there, she didn't get long enough, end quote. So Josh has been doing his best to move on since his father's death. And he said he beat himself up for many years. And I knew this was coming even before I read it. I knew he was going to be, feeling responsible and that he could have changed things. And truth of the matter is, that's probably not ever true. But he said he beats himself up. He beat himself up for many years on the what ifs. What if he had been there? What if he had paid more attention? What if he had done more to get Gwen and Gracie out of that house? And he tells us that he and Gracie aren't close. And I don't really get the feeling that they were close before. I don't think he was really close to his mom or siblings, to be honest. I think he was close to Dad. But anyways, he says they occasionally talk, but he doesn't think they'll ever really be close. Josh tells us he has PTSD. And it's not only from his time in Iraq. He knows the way he grew up and the things he dealt with also are a contributing factor to his PTSD. He says he learned how to cage his rage. And the therapist told him, so he was seeing a therapist and working through that, which is great. But the therapist was like, you need to learn how to deal with the rage, because eventually that cage could break. So that's what he's been doing for the many years, is dealing with his rage and processing his emotions. And he said that was the hardest thing he's ever had to do. He even knows, as he struggled with it, it was part of the reason why he did this show. It was a healing thing to talk about. And he says it has helped. Sitting here talking about it for the first time and going through it has been oddly therapeutic. And he says he tells people he's forgiven Stephanie. But he's not so much forgiven Stephanie as he's just let it go. It's not good for him to keep holding on, and he knows it. He learned a long time ago, harboring hate and resentment doesn't hurt the other person. It destroys you from the inside out. And he wants better than that for himself. So now, that's a horrible story. I was ready to get on Google and do my normal search, and I do. And this horrible story took such a tragic turn. And I'm emotional. So let's get through this. I go onto Google and type in Stephanie Hudnall. And the first place that pops up is my cinemaholic.com, which I love. My good old trusty friend. And the article I'm seeing is titled William Hudnall Murder. Where are Stephanie and Guinevere Hudnall now? Dated November 3rd, 2022. And right off the bat, it tells me that it was June 2011 when William was murdered and that he lived in Florida, which I didn't know at the time because they moved around so much. Didn't know where they ended up. So my math all this time, whereas 2019, he's talking about 7 years, 2012 being the last time he saw his mom off, that all flows. So I got that right. William was born in 1959 in Jacksonville, Florida. He served in the U.S. Marine Corps and then was employed as a pipe fitter following his discharge from the service. And was only 51 when he was murdered. So a few months before his murder, he and Stephanie became estranged and lived separately, and the girls were living with her. On the morning of June 9th, Stephanie and Guinevere drove to William's home and found him brutally murdered. And as Josh mentioned, Stephanie called 911. In this section of the article titled, "Who Killed William Hudnall?" I'm going to read directly from this for the first paragraph or so. So I quote, "The police arrived on the scene and could immediately tell that the scene at William's house looked staged. They brought Stephanie and Guinevere in for questioning, and something in their stories didn't add up. The mother and daughter duo went to the top of the investigators' suspect list. The detectives on the case questioned them until they broke, and the horrible truth came out in bits and pieces." And I continue to quote, "Stephanie wanted her husband to die so they could get his Social Security benefits. On 2 previous occasions, Stephanie had tried to kill William. A failed attempt at poisoning and an unsuccessful effort to light his bed on fire while he slept. Once she even refused to call for help as he had a stroke." That's not mentioned. So that might have happened while Josh was in the military and probably not there for firsthand account. Okay. Stephanie was able to manipulate her daughter Guinevere to murder William. Stephanie convinced the 19-year-old Guinevere that the only way to get their hands on some money was to kill their father. Stephanie had actually driven Guinevere over to William's house the night of the murder, and Guinevere had spent hours just talking with her unsuspecting father. Once he was asleep, Guinevere had struck him repeatedly with a pickaxe. He got multiple blows on his head and chest, which is why I said they were not going to have an open casket funeral. Just wasn't going to have it. So then the police arrested the mother and daughter on June 12th, 2011. And if I'm not mistaken, that's only 3 days. He was murdered on the 9th. Yeah. So it only took him 3 days to murder or to arrest them. Stephanie and Guinevere were initially charged with first-degree murder. All through the trial, Stephanie insisted that she wasn't present in the room when Gwen killed William. But according to Guinevere, her testimony, her mother had been there. So there was some suspicious stuff going on. Gwen also confessed that Stephanie had been the mastermind behind the plan and that Guinevere had no choice but to do the decidedly horrible deed herself. Stephanie and Gwen were both found guilty of second-degree murder and conspiracy to commit second-degree murder after signing a no-contest plea. So I'm assuming that's why it went from first degree to second. They actually signed a plea. The court sentenced both of them to 40 years of jail time, and they are not serving in the same prison. Okay, so that's the horrible events of what happened to William. And in a very tragic turn I wasn't expecting, and I think that probably hit me harder. In a horrible turn, I land on a website called distractify.com. Never been there before, but you know. The article I'm looking at is titled, "Joshua Hudnall Died Before His Season 5 episode of Evil Lives Here aired." I wasn't expecting that. This article is dated September 2020. The article tells us Joshua was found dead in his truck at the age of 27. So he's even younger than my son. In August of 2018, which I don't know how, I don't have the mental capacity to find out how old my son was in 2018. So, yeah. Anyways, he died in August of 2018. This aired like January 2019. He'd been living in Florida at the time, which I found, I saw another article that said it was in Cincinnati, so I'm not really sure. That was the only thing about the articles that were different. Everything else is the same. But he was found dead in his truck. And his cause of death was later attributed to liver failure. I don't know what causes liver failure. I really don't. At such a young age, too. Okay. I don't know about you, but that just hit me hard. Oh, dude. That's such a horrible childhood. And he felt so alone that the army felt like the first safe place that he was at in Iraq. He lost his best friend, his father, tragically by his mother and his own sister's hand. I mean, just all this tragedy. And he was trying to get on with his life and move on. So after I read that, I honestly couldn't go on. I'm sorry. There are a lot of articles on Stephanie Hudnall on YouTube, and I didn't go into any more of them because at that point they weren't Josh's story, and that's why we're here for, and especially, you know, telling it. There was even a YouTube episode, I don't remember who, what, why, but it had to do with Stephanie and Guinevere's different point of views, which would be, I wasn't there, she was there, I'm sure. But I didn't watch any more after reading about Josh. I just couldn't. Josh was just as much of a victim as William. And in many ways, Josh's life ended when William died. And I really just hate the fact that he didn't get to live a full life and experience whatever dreams he had, whether that been marriage, family, kids of his own, or just living in peace by himself. I don't know, but I hate that he didn't get that opportunity. So, yeah. What'd you think? What'd you think of the story? It was, the ending got me. Like, I didn't want to hear how horrible Stephanie was. Obviously, nobody does. But then to hear that Josh didn't survive, didn't get to live his life. That's probably part of the best thing about these episodes is that I could go in and see that so-and-so's done this, they're married, they have kids, they've started their own business, or, you know, they live in a peaceful, quiet part of the world by themselves and paint. I've seen all of those when I've been doing these episodes. This is the first one that I've seen where tragedy hit and that person's no longer there. So, on that note, thank you. Sorry it turned a little teary-eyed there at the end, but yeah, what did you think? Let me know. A horrible story, but it turned tragic at the end, in my opinion. Thank you for watching, guys. I love you. And until next time, goodbye.